She got her fill of his screwing and drilled herself and the kid through the head. The little broad was only 2 years old. The note his broad left said, "I can't stand your hollering any longer. Goodbye." A head shrinker here at the time said, when the broad croaked herself, it shut off Brass Nuts' box. I lay there thinking about what the con had said. I thought about Oscar and wondered if he could pull his bid, or if he would go back to his parents in a pine box, or worse, to the crazy farm. Oscar had been sentenced to a year by the same judge that had socked it into me. Oscar, poor chump, had started going with a crippled Irish girl of 17. In the dark balcony of a downtown theater, they were seen smooching by the son of a close friend of the girl's family. He reported post-haste to his parents, who wired up the girl's parents. They were Irish, with temper and prejudice. They third-degreed the girl, and she confessed that old black Oscar had indeed trespassed the Forbidden Valley. The charge of statutory rape naturally stood up, and here was old Oscar, next door to me. I slapped the itching sting on my thigh. I pulled the sheet back. Lord have mercy, how I hated them. It was a bed bug I had smashed, but he was only a scout. When that flashlight jarred me awake an hour later, a division of them was parading the walls. I lay wide-eyed until morning. The inside of that shiny apple was really something else. After all our tests, we fish were taken out of the quarantine tank on the 10th day to the warden's office. My turn came to go in. I got up from the long bench in the hall outside his office and walked in. My knees were having a boxing match as I stood before him. He was a silver-maned, profane, huge white bull with 2 tiny chunks of black fire rammed deep into his eye sockets. He said, "Well, Sambo, you sure got your black nigger ass in a sling, didn't you? Well, understand me. We didn't send for you, but you came. We are here to punish you smart aleck bastards. So if you fuck around, 2 things can happen to you. Both of them horrible. We got a hole here that we bury tough punks in. It's a strip cell without light, 20 feet below ground. Down there, 2 slices of bread and a pint of water twice a day. You can go out that north gate in a box for your second choice. So take this rule book and study it. Now get your rusty black ass out of my face." The only thing I said before I eased out of there was, "Yes, sir, boss man." And I was grinning like a Mississippi rape suspect turned loose by the mob. It was a wise thing I had uncled on him. One of those arrogant repeaters went to the hole for having a sassy look in his eyes. The charge was visual insubordination. Oscar and I were assigned to work and live in cell block B. It was all black. Of the 3, it was the only one without toilets. We had buckets in cells that we took out each morning and dumped into running water in a trough behind the cell block. The only stench in my life I have ever smelled that was worse than that cell block on a warm night was a sick hype. It was rough, all right, and a terrible battle of wits. The battle mainly centered around staying out of sight and trouble with the dummy. He walked on the balls of his feet and could read a con's mind. It was terrifying to have maybe a slice of contraband bread in your bosom, and then from nowhere have the dummy pop up. He didn't pass out an instruction leaflet running down the lingo of that cane. If you misunderstood what it said, the dummy would crack the leaded shaft of it against your skull. After I had put in 6 months on my bit, a young Negro con came in on transfer from the big joint and brought me a wire from party. He sent word that we were still tight, and I was his horse if I never won a race. It felt good to know he had forgiven me for turning chicken back there in the alley with the balloon. The dummy hated everybody. He felt something much more frightful for Oscar. I don't know whether it was that the dummy had a hate for God too, and he knew how religious Oscar was, and had focused all his hate on a living target. Oscar and I shared a double bunk cell. I had the bottom bunk. It was a chilling sight at night when the dummy should have been at home to look up from a book and see him out there on the tier, motionless, staring up at Oscar in his bunk reading the Bible. When I was sure that the cold, luminous green eyes had slipped away for the night, I would crack, "Oscar, my man, I like you. Will you take some good advice from a friend?" "I am telling you, pal, it is driving the dummy off his rocker to see you reading that Bible. Pal, why in the hell don't you stop reading it for your own good?" The square jerk would go on reading. He hadn't even noticed the dummy's visit. He would say, "I know you are my friend, and I appreciate your advice, but I can't take it. Don't worry about me. Jesus will protect me." Mama was writing at least once a week. Every month she visited me. On her last visit, without worrying her too much, I suggested it would be a good idea to put in a long-distance call to the warden once a week, just so he would know somebody out there loved me and wanted me to stay healthy. She was looking fine and had saved her money. She had opened a beauty shop. She told me when I came up for parole, she was sure a friend of hers would give me a job. At night, after her visits, I would lie sleepless all night, mentally recapping our sad lives. I could still remember, too, every mole and crease in Henry's face. One night after one of her visits, the radio loudspeaker on the cell house wall blared out, "Springtime in the Rockies." I tried to keep my crying secret from Oscar, but he heard me. He marked off a chapter in the Bible for me to read, but with the dummy around, I wasn't about to do something stupid like that. The dummy put one over on Jesus and busted Oscar. We had almost finished mopping the flag when the cell house runner brought me 2 wieners from the kitchen. A pal had sent them. I gave Oscar one. He stuck it inside his shirt. I stood my mop against the wall and ducked into an empty cell and wolfed mine down. We had finished mopping and were at the supply closet putting our mops and buckets away. Oscar was nibbling slowly on his wiener, like he was safe and sound at the Last Supper. I saw the giant shadow glue itself against the wall next to the closet door. I looked through the trap door in the corner of my eye. The universe reeled. It was the dummy. He saw the piece of wiener in Oscar's hand. The dummy's green eyes were oscillating. That deadly cane razored through the air and cut a slice of hair and bloody flesh from the side of Oscar's head. The scarlet glob was hanging by a slimy thread of flesh, dangling like an awful earring near the tip of his earlobe. Oscar's eyes walled toward the back of his head as he moaned and slipped to the flag. From the gray-whitish core of the wound, spouts of blood pulsed out. The dummy just stood there, looking down at the carnage. His green eyes were twinkling in excitement. I had seen him every day for 8 months. I had never seen him smile. He was smiling now, like he was watching 2 cute kittens frolicking. I stooped to help Oscar. I felt feathery puffs of air against my cheek. The cane was screaming. The dummy was furiously waggling it beside my head. It was screaming, "Get out." I lay in my cell wondering if the dummy had second thoughts and would try for 2. I heard the voices of the hospital orderlies on the flag taking Oscar away. I remember the murderous force of the blow the dummy had struck. I remembered that pleased look on his face. I knew from Con grapevine that he was from Alabama. I knew now it hadn't been Oscar's Bible that had put the dummy's balls in the fire. The dummy knew about that crippled Irish girl. Oscar went from the hospital into the hole for 15 days. The charges? Possession of contraband food and physical aggression against an officer. I was there, and the only aggression on Oscar's part was the natural resistance of his flesh and bone to that steel cane. The parole board met in the joint every month to consider applications. Every con, when he had served to within several months of his minimum, started dreaming of the streets and that upcoming parole consideration. Oscar was in the hole, and I missed his company. He was a square, but a nice one, with lots of wry wit. Several cons slightly older than I came in on transfer from the big joint. They claimed to be Mac men. In bad weather, when there was no yard recreation, I would join them at a table on the flag. I didn't talk much. I usually listened. I was fascinated by the yarns they spun about their pimping ability. They had a lot of bullshit, and I was stealing as much as I could from them to use when I got out. I would go back to my cell excited. I would pretend I had a whore before me. I would stand there in the cell and pimp up a storm. I didn't know that the crap I was rehearsing wouldn't get a quarter in the street. Oscar came out of the hole and was put into an isolation cell on the top tier of the cell house. I didn't see him come in, so I wasn't prepared when I got a chance to go up there. When I got to the cell with his number in the slot, a skinny joker was peeing in his bucket with his back to me. He was in a laughing fit. I checked the number in the slot again. It was Oscar's number, all right. I pulled the key to the supply closet across the bars of the cell door. The skeleton jumped and spun around facing me. His eyes were wild and vacant. It was Oscar. Only that livid bald scar on the side of his head made me sure. He didn't seem to remember me, so I said, "How are you, pal? I knew they couldn't stop a stepper." He just stood there, his dingus flopping from his open fly. I said, "Jack, you are going to give your bright future the flu if you don't get it out of the draft." He ignored my words, and then from the very bottom of his throat, I can hear a kind of eerie, high-pitched humming or keening, like maybe the mating call of a werewolf. I was beginning to worry about him. I was standing there trying to figure something to say to get through to him. He hadn't been out of the hole for more than 2 hours. Maybe some loose circuit would jar back to contact. I knew he had been destroyed when he gave me a sly look and went to the back of his cell. He picked up his bucket and thrust his hand into it. He brought out a fistful of crap. He scraped the crap from his right palm into the rigid upturned left palm. Using his left palm as a kind of palette, he dipped into the crap with his right index finger and started to finger paint on the cell wall. I just stood there in shock. Finally, he stopped, snapped to attention, saluted me, and stuck his chest out proudly and pointed a crappy finger at his art on the wall. There was an idiot's look of triumph on his face, like he had finished the Sistine Chapel ceiling. I gave up on him. I went downstairs and told the cell house screw. The next day they shipped Oscar to the funny farm, where perhaps he is today, 30 years later. My time went fast after the 8th month. I had gone before the parole board, and I was waiting for my pink slip. A white one meant denial and a new date for consideration. I saw the mail clerk when he shoved it through the bars of my cell. I leaped up and grabbed a small brown envelope. My hand shook so badly it took seconds to rip it open. It was pink. I banged my fists against the steel of my cell wall. I was so happy I couldn't feel pain. They dressed me out in a cheap Glen plaid suit. I would have been thrilled to have left that den of pressure in tar and feathers. On the way out, I had to face the bull. When I walked into his office, he said, "Well, Snowball, you must have had your rabbit's foot. So long. See you in a couple of weeks." I wasn't out yet, so I gave him the same uncle smile going out that I gave him coming in. When I walked out of the joint, the fresh air was like a blast of oxygen. It made me woozy. I turned and looked back at the joint. The dummy was standing at the chapel window staring at me. But for once, that steel cane wasn't talking to me.